But I don't know, maybe I can do that.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's see how it goes.
Let's give it a whirl.
A little nervous.
Just breathe.
Here I am, back again with another video about live incidents. I'm sure you've all seen the first video I did, 13 horrifying incidents that happened live, since it has a decent amount of views, I suppose. The second one I think is actually better than the first one, but of course YouTube decided to age restrict it months after I uploaded it, so thanks for that, YouTube. Anyway, you know how these videos work. They revolve around scary, horrifying, and generally just shocking things that happened either live on TV or at events where an audience was present. Just remember, this is YouTube, so I can't show any graphic violence. This is the site that won't let me say real or suicide after all. Anyway, I've taken up enough time, so here are 9 more horrifying incidents that happened live. In August 1972, athletes, fans and broadcasters from all over the world gathered in Munich, West Germany for the Olympic Summer Games. This was the first Olympic Games to be held in Germany in over 25 years, with the last event having taken place in 1936 under the Nazi regime. Having spent years since the end of World War II working to shed the shadow of the atrocities committed by Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party, the event organisers wanted to present a democratic and optimistic Germany to the world, as shown by their game's official motto, the Cheerful Games. The Olympics were held from August 26th to September 11th, with the Soviet Union dominating the event, winning the most gold medals overall. Unlike other Olympic Games, however, this event is not remembered for the efforts of all those who took part, but a harrowing event that took place in the closing days of the Games. In order to distance themselves from the intimidating image of Nazi Germany, the event organisers did not employ any armed guards or any kind of heavy security at all, with the guards that actually were on hand only being trained to deal with drunk and disorderly spectators. Security in the athletes' village was apparently so unfit for the Games that athletes could come and go as they pleased, and could even sneak past security and go to other countries' rooms by going over the fencing that surrounded the village. One person who was particularly concerned about the lack of security was the Israeli delegation head, Shmuel Lalkin, who had expressed concern with the authorities about his team's lodgings. The Israeli team was housed in a relatively isolated part of the Olympic Village on the ground floor of a small building close to a gate, which Lalkin felt made his team particularly vulnerable to an outside assault. The West German authorities apparently assured Lalkin that extra security would be provided to look after the Israeli team. On the evening of September 4th, the Israeli athletes enjoyed a night out before returning to the Olympic Village. The athletes immediately retired for the night upon getting back to their apartments to rest up for the events of the next day. Little did they know, they would enter a real-life nightmare upon waking up. At 4:30 a.m. on September the 5th, a group of Canadian athletes were returning from a night out when they came upon 8 men wearing tracksuits and carrying duffel bags. Believing them to be athletes, the Canadians helped them over the fence into the village. However, these men were not athletes, and in their duffel bags, they carried assault rifles, pistols, and grenades. Using stolen keys, the group made their way into the Israeli apartments. Storming the building, they immediately took wrestling coach Moishe Weinberg hostage, ordering him to take them to the other athletes. He led them to the apartments where the weightlifting and wrestling teams were staying, likely hoping that they would be able to fight the attackers. Weinberg and weightlifter Yosef Romano both attempted to fight them off, but were shot dead in the process. 9 athletes were then taken hostage. The attackers were members of the Palestinian Black September terrorist group, who took the athletes hostage in order to demand that Israel release 250 Palestinian prisoners, and that if Israel refused, the hostages would be executed. Despite the situation, Avery Brundage, president of the Olympics Committee, announced that the Games would continue.
We have only the strength of a great ideal. I'm sure the public will agree that we cannot allow a handful of terrorists to destroy this nucleus of international cooperation and goodwill. We have this nucleus of international cooperation and goodwill we have in the Olympic a movement. The games must go on.
But reversed this decision 10 hours later and suspended the events. Thousands of spectators rushed from the Olympic Stadium and gathered outside the village to see what was happening. At the same time, live television crews also gathered on the hill overlooking the apartments and began filming as the terrorists could be seen on the balcony. The event was being broadcasted to 900 million people worldwide. The Israeli Prime Minister refused to cooperate with the terrorists, while the German authorities attempted to negotiate with them after having refused assistance from Israel's counter-terrorist unit. While attempting to negotiate, a police unit attempted to take the terrorists by surprise by scaling the building. However, they failed to realize that news crews were filming them doing this, and that the terrorists were also watching the event on television and would obviously see them coming. This plan was abandoned, and they instead agreed to the terrorists' demand that they and the hostages be flown to Egypt. The police flew them and the hostages to the airport, with the plan to ambush them. Several police officers disguised as flight crew on the plane, without consulting command, abandoned their mission and left the plane. There were also sharpshooters placed around the perimeter, but they had no sniper training and lacked proper equipment. When the terrorists arrived and saw the empty plane, they realized it was a trap and began running back to the helicopter.
في حال تعرضنا لكميل إنه ندافع عن أنفسنا بكل طاقاتنا وكل شجاعتنا ولا نترخص أبداً. وهاي كانت تعليمات القيادة إنه إحنا نقاتل كأننا في معركة، نقاتل عن أنفسنا وعن قضيتنا ولا نترخص أبداً.
The snipers began firing at them, leading to a shootout. One of the terrorists threw a grenade into a helicopter containing 4 of the hostages, killing them and the pilots inside. They then gunned down the remaining 5 hostages. Eventually, 5 of the terrorists were killed, with the last 3 surrendering. In a press conference the next day, the Munich police commissioner made a shocking confession, saying that the terrorists were more clever and professional than them, and that the hostages were doomed to die from the beginning. The games continued after 24 hours, with the remaining Israeli athletes having left Munich. The terrorists were later released after Palestinians hijacked a plane and demanded they be let go. The Arthur Cohn documentary, One Day in September, revealed that the German authorities had helped the terrorist group to hijack the plane in exchange for them to not carry out any more terrorist attacks in Germany. This event obviously shook the world, as it happened during the biggest and most watched spectacle of the year and was broadcast to hundreds of millions of homes. It was most horrifying for the viewers that happened to be Jewish, as once again they could do nothing but watch as Jewish blood was spilt on German soil.
With same-game parlays on FanDuel, you can bet how your favorite players will do.
With a keister like that, he should be backing guys down in the post like me.
I love you, young Chuck.
Get a no-sweat first bet and get up to $2,500 back if you don't win. FanDuel, official partner of the NBA.
Vester Lee Flanagan II was a television news journalist from Oakland, California. After earning a degree in radio and television at San Francisco State University in 1995, he began his career in broadcasting in 1997, where he worked as a reporter for WTOC-TV in Georgia, before moving to Tallahassee, Florida to work for WTWC-TV in 1999, but was soon let go for, quote, odd behavior, which involved him verbally abusing female co-workers who pointed out mistakes in his reporting, though he claimed he lashed out at them for making offensive comments about his homosexuality. After spending the next decade working at various news stations throughout the southern United States, he was hired by WDBJ in Roanoke, Virginia, as a multimedia journalist under the professional name Bryce Williams. Only several months into his time at the station, though, he once again began to display the concerning behavior that led to his dismissal from WTOC-TV, with his co-workers saying that they felt frightened and threatened by him. He had been ordered by the station's director to seek help for his anger issues. WDBJ dismissed Flanagan on February 1st, 2013, citing his volatile behavior. According to a former colleague, upon learning of his dismissal, Flanagan lashed out at newsroom staffers, resulting in the staffers being put in a room while police escorted him out of the building. The station was concerned that Flanagan might return and provided security to the staff there for their protection. Flanagan was apparently so enraged after the incident that he killed his own cats out of anger. He later got a job at a local United Health Group call center after his dismissal. He had a confrontation with a female employee who casually pointed out how quiet he was being, to which he responded aggressively, telling her to never talk to him again. From this point, Flanagan went quiet, and it would be 2 years before he would finally resurface. On August 26, 2015, Alison Parker and her cameraman, Adam Ward, prepared for their assignment to cover the 50th anniversary of the nearby Smith Mountain Lake, with Parker interviewing the executive director of Smith Mountain Lake Regional Chamber of Commerce, Vicky Gardner, about the events. Alison Bailey Parker was a 24-year-old reporter who'd been hired by WDBJ in 2014 as a correspondent for their AM show, Morning. Her 26-year-old cameraman, Adam Ward, had been at the station since July 2011 as a videographer, as well as an occasional sports reporter. The interview took place early in the morning. At around 6:45 a.m., right in the middle of the interview, 8 loud banging noises rang out, followed by screaming. The camera then fell to the ground, with a man briefly being seen before the feed cuts out. WDBJ then switched back to morning anchor Kimberly McBroom at the station's news studio, seemingly confused about what just happened. She later stated that she believed the noises could have been a car backfiring or shots being fired in the background. Alison Parker and Adam Ward had both been shot dead, while Vicky Gardner had been shot in the back but survived. At the news station, Alison Parker's shocked colleagues reviewed the horrific footage, freezing of the view of the shooter. It didn't take long before they recognized him as Vesta Flanagan. They immediately called the sheriff's office. At 11:14 a.m. on the day of the shooting, Flanagan uploaded a 56-second phone camera video to his Twitter and Facebook accounts before they were suspended, shot from a first-person perspective of the incident. ABC News received a 23-page fax at 8:26 a.m., allegedly sent by Flanagan. In the document, Flanagan described his grievances over what he alleged to be racial discrimination and sexual harassment committed by black men and white women in his workplace, believing that he was targeted because he was a homosexual black man. He also claimed that Parker had made a coded racist remark during her internship at WDBJ regarding a friend of Flanagan's, and the board had filed a complaint against him to the station's Human Resources Department after working with him on one occasion. Authorities tracked Flanagan's cell phone to locate him. After abandoning his car at an airport, Flanagan drove a rented car to escape from the police, hoping that they would not be able to identify him from the car's license plate. However, an automated license plate reader in a Virginia State Trooper's car identified the car that had been rented in Flanagan's name, and a chase began. The trooper called for backup and attempted to initiate a traffic stop, but Flanagan sped away. His car ran off the side of the road and struck an embankment after a pursuit of less than 2 miles. The police found Flanagan dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The footage of the shooting is banned from YouTube, not just due to the site's policy on graphic violence, but also because Alison Parker's father, Andy Parker, has made it very clear that he doesn't want the footage of his daughter's murder to be available on the internet, even going as far as to make an NFT out of Flanagan's recorded footage, so that he owns the copyright to it and therefore can issue DMCA takedown notices for any uploads of said footage. It's hard to blame him, really. It makes sense that he wouldn't want people uploading the moment his daughter was taken away from him by such a sick, twisted man. This next segment shows just how far a parent will go to get revenge on someone who harmed their child. Leon Gary Plauché, more well known as simply Gary, was basically what would come to mind if you thought of the well-to-do American working man. Born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, he briefly served in the United States Army before settling down with his wife and starting a family, which he would provide for through his job as a traveling salesman and also as a cameraman for a local news station. He would also work as a coach for his local junior football team. Being a sportsman himself, he obviously wanted his own children to become interested in sports as well. His eldest son, Jody Plauché, told him that he was interested in learning karate. Gary, of course, supported his son's eagerness and took him to their local karate dojo, where they met the instructor, Jeff Doucette. Doucette was seen by everyone as a very kind, helpful instructor who loved spending time with the children he taught and wanted to make the experience as fun as possible for them. Despite his positive attitude, Doucette did not have an easy life in Baton Rouge. He had no family or friends in the area and earned so little from working at the dojo that he was having to actually live there because he couldn't afford to live anywhere else. Gary Plauché, taking pity on Doucette, began helping him however he could, letting him come round to his family's home for meals, letting him use their facilities, and even taking him on trips with them, Eventually, he became very close to the family. According to Jodi's mother, her son quit football and basketball to spend as much time at Doucette's dojo as possible. He instructed 3 of the 4 Plauché children in karate and was trusted in the community. Doucette enjoyed spending time with the boys, and they enjoyed spending time with him. Unfortunately, Jeff Doucette would use the family's trust in him to do something unspeakable. On February 14th, 1984, Doucette picked Jodi Plauché up to take him for a drive, telling his mother that they'd be back in 15 minutes. Jodi's mother, June, trusted him and saw no reason to doubt that Doucette would bring Jodi back safe and sound. This would end up being a huge mistake. Doucette did not return Jodi home that day. Instead, he took him to the bus station, where the two boarded a bus heading to the west coast. On the way, Doucette shaved his beard and dyed Jodi's blonde hair to black in order to pass him off as his own son to avoid suspicion. Doucette and Jodi checked into a cheap motel in Anaheim, California, just a short walk away from Disneyland. I can't say exactly what Doucette did to Jodi in that motel room, but you can probably guess what happened. All I'm going to say is, it's the worst experience a child can go through. This went on until Jodi asked to call his parents, which Doucette allowed. Police, alerted by Jodi's parents, traced the call and arrested Doucette while Jodi was put on a flight back to Louisiana. News crews were there to film Jodi being reunited with his parents. Gary was clearly shaken from learning what Doucette had done to his son.
As a parent in your position, did you learn anything from this?
Just how much I love my children. Or maybe a little bit more protective or overprotective, I don't know.
Mike Barnett, a local sheriff's deputy and friend of Gary, who was also the one who told him about what had happened to Jodi, said that when he told him, Gary's exact words were, "I'll kill the son of a bitch." After Jodi's return, Gary spent several days drinking in the local bar to drown his sorrows, and also asking people when they thought Doucette might be brought back to Baton Rouge for trial. A former colleague from WBRZ News, who happened to be out for a drink, told Gary that Doucette would be flown in at 9:08 p.m. on March 16th. That day, the news crew gathered at the Baton Rouge airport to film Jeff Doucette as he was escorted off the plane by
fighting guys with boxes on their
crew
head.
waited for him in the arrival hall. The hall seemed to be empty except for
Like
one
Browns
man standing
fans,
at the
right?
payphones. As Jeff Doucette walked past, the man at the payphones turned around, drew a pistol, and fired at Doucette's head. The gunman was Gary Plauché. Mike Barnett, who was among the police escorting Doucette, grabbed Gary and yelled, "Why, Gary? Why?" Gary was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, which was reduced to manslaughter, to which he pleaded no contest. He was sentenced to a 7-year suspended sentence and 300 hours of community service. Judge Frank Sire ruled that sending Gary to prison would not help anyone, and that there was virtually no risk of him committing another crime. Gary Plauché actually received praise for what he did, with many seeing him as a hero for killing Jeff Doucette, who, as it was later revealed, had harmed many children before Jodi Plauché. Gary's own ex-wife June said that when he told her what he had done, her response was simply, "The least you could have done was let me drive you." Years after the event, Gary Plauché suffered a debilitating stroke, which left him almost incapable of speaking. In 2013, Gary gave one final interview. In it, he was asked if he regretted what he did to Jeff Doucette, and if he would do it again.
Do you regret killing Jeff Doucette?
No.
No. Would you do it again?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Some people call him the hero. I don't know about that, but most parents understood the situation. If it would have been them. Fat Gary made the statement, and they could dig him up and they'd shoot him again.
He would suffer another stroke a year after this interview and passed away at the age of 68. On one hand, Gary Plauché slaying such an evil human being is not horrifying in and of itself, and certainly no one, least of all his son Jodi, were holding it against him. But there's no denying that seeing a man murder another on live TV is something that the people of Baton Rouge were not expecting, and to those watching at the time, it will have certainly been a shocking event. Yet another story about a fire that occurred in a nightclub during a concert. The Cromagnon nightclub was a concert venue that operated out of Buenos Aires, Argentina. It was operated by Omar Shaban and opened on April 12, 2004. Shaban intended for it to be an entertainment hotspot in the area, hoping to attract patrons from miles around, and opened the club with a performance by Los Caballeros, a local band that had been growing in popularity. Following the grand opening concert, the club was set to become a big entertainment venue for music fans in Buenos Aires. Unfortunately, within the same year of the club's opening, a massive tragedy would strike. On December 30th, 2004, Los Caballeros were once again performing a sold-out show at the club. Right from the start, health and safety regulations were ignored. The club had a capacity of 1,500, but sold 3,000 tickets, with 1,000 more entering throughout the night. Of course, the true danger begins as it did in the Station nightclub and Collected nightclub of my previous two videos, with pyrotechnics. Just before 11 p.m, a firework was set off on stage. A hanging plastic net instantly caught fire, and foam in the ceiling was soon ablaze. Wood and styrofoam decorations in the club and other flammable parts of the venue, which reportedly included teddy bear stuffing as a cheap alternative to wool fiber, meant the fire spread rapidly, producing lethal toxic gases. Of the 6 exits out of the club, 4 had been padlocked in order to prevent people from entering without paying. As such, a crush began, slowing people's escape from the club, exposing them to smoke filling the venue, with the air filled with poisonous gases such as cyanide and carbon monoxide. Those who suffered exposure to the smoke for more than a few minutes died. At the end of it all, 194 had died, while 1,432 were injured. The majority of the victims were teens and adults in their early 20s, though young children and even babies were found amongst the victims as well, as one of the club's bathrooms had been used as a nursery for parents to leave their children during the concerts. Following the incident, Omar Shaban was immediately arrested. Cromagnon's fire safety certificate had expired a month earlier, and of the 15 fire extinguishers on site, only 5 actually worked, and the club should have been closed by the superintendent of the fire department. It was revealed that on the night of the concert, Omar Shaban had hired a police officer to provide security on the door and to ignore any irregularities in capacity, alcohol sales, obstruction of emergency exits, and use of fireworks. For not properly enforcing the law with respect to the fire safety certificate and the police department, the city's public officials were considered guilty. Trials for those involved with the violation of fire safety laws, which led to the deaths of almost 200 people, did not begin until 2008. Omar Shaban had been in prison since 2007 while he awaited trial. In 2009, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for fraudulence, but never actually spent any time in jail due to an appeal. He died in 2014 from Hodgkin's lymphoma. Various public officials and police officers were also eventually prosecuted for bribery. As for Caballeros, they did not play again until 2006 and were often pursued by many who held them responsible. By October 2012, they could no longer escape prosecution, and all 6 members were sentenced to 7 years in prison. The deadly consequences of the fire of the Cromagnon were unfortunately in part due to 2 common aspects of Argentinian culture: corruption and not enforcing the law. After the fire, many clubs throughout Argentina were closed for not complying with the law. This is not the only nightclub fire that will appear on this list, with the next one you'll be seeing on here being much, much worse. The Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus was the largest traveling circus in the United States. It was founded in a merger between the Ringling Brothers' World's Greatest Show and Barnum and Bailey's Greatest Show on Earth in 1919, and ran for almost 100 years, finally ceasing activity in 2017. It fell out of favor with the general public due to it being one of the few circuses that still used animals as performers, with many seeing it as cruel and inhumane. Many years ago, however, people came from miles around to see the circus, not caring about how the animals were treated. The circus would travel by train throughout all of the United States and usually perform for several days before moving on to the next city. It boasted a truly massive circus tent, being able to hold upwards of 9,000 spectators. The circus became particularly popular in the 1940s. With the world gripped in the chaos of World War II, the circus provided a way for civilians to escape from it all and just enjoy themselves. Due to most young men serving overseas, the majority of spectators that the circus attracted at that point would be women, children, and the elderly. The circus was also affected by the war, as the trains that they would use to travel from town to town were also being used to transport supplies and resources for the war effort. The circus arrived in Hartford, Connecticut on July 5, 1944. They were actually late setting up, as they were supposed to have arrived and been ready to go by the afternoon of that day, but they were delayed due to transport issues. That said, they still managed to put on a show that evening and were set to have another one the next day. July 6th would be an incredibly hot day, with temperatures outside nearing 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and would be even hotter inside the circus tent, where an estimated 7,000 people had gathered for the show. Little did those in attendance know that disaster would strike only after the first act of the show. After the lion tamer had performed, and the lions were taken back to their cages, a small fire began on the southwest corner of the tent. It's not known what caused it, but it began spreading fairly quickly. The circus band leader noticed the flame and instructed the band to play Stars and Stripes Forever, which was used to signal danger and distress to the circus personnel. The ringleader of the circus told the audience not to panic and to leave in an orderly fashion, but his microphone was without power as the fire had shorted out the electronics in the tent. Ushers attempted to put the fire out with jugs of water, but this only helped the fire spread, as the tent was actually covered in gasoline as a waterproofing method. Realizing that their efforts were in vain, the ushers instead began helping people escape the tent. As the 7,000 audience members began filing out of the tent as fast as they could, the fire spread to the roof, endangering those who were still in the tent at the time. Eventually, the roof collapsed. Any audience members who were still unable to escape the tent due to the crowded exits, running around trying to find their loved ones, or had simply remained in their seats, hoping the fire would be put out, had perished. At the end of it all, 168 fatalities were recorded. The causes of death ranged from people burning to death, to people jumping off the bleachers, and some even suffocating after people were piled on top of each other while trying to escape. Over 700 injuries were also recorded. To this day, the cause of the fire remains unknown. Some believe it started due to a discarded cigarette, while others believe it may have been arson. In 1950, Robert Dale Segee, who had been arrested on several separate arson charges, claimed he was the one who started the circus fire, although investigators doubted he was telling the truth, as there was no proof he was in Connecticut at the time. He would have been 15 and therefore obviously living with his parents, and he also had a history of mental illness, leading the investigators to determine that he was lying. For his other arson charges, he was sentenced to 44 years in prison, where he would remain until his death in 1997 at the age of 68, by which time he had denied ever starting the fire. If the fire was the result of arson, the arsonist was never found, and the true cause will almost certainly never be determined. On July 7, 1944, charges of involuntary manslaughter were filed against 5 officials and employees of the Ringling Brothers. Within the ensuing days, the circus reached an agreement with Hartford officials to accept full financial responsibility and pay whatever amount the city requested in damages. The circus paid almost $5 million to the 600 victims and families who had filed complaints against them by 1954. All circus profits from the fire until then had been set aside to pay off these claims. The circus may be gone now, but its memory lives on, and for the people of Hartford, Connecticut, they will never forget that hot July day of 1944, when over 169 people lost their lives on what should have been just a fun day out with their families.
State of Survival. Play now.
Want to have a side hustle bringing you an additional income stream, but you don't want to have to build websites or sales funnels, create videos, or learn how to master paid advertising, if you want to truly have something that can work without having to become an expert in anything, then this video is for you. I'm going to show you a no BS way for you to start receiving $5,000 checks payable to you by helping me grow one of my online businesses. And you're going to be able to do this without having to get tripped up by any of the things in the past that might have held you back. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with wanting to gain a skill set. I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that the reason I've been able to profitably spend millions of dollars in paid advertising and generate tens of millions of dollars in online sales is because I became an expert myself over the past 10 years. And although it was challenging, it was worth it. But if I had to start all over again, I would not choose that path at first, knowing what I know now. You see, there is a way with modern technology for you to tap into OPS, which stands for other people's skills and systems. It's essentially borrowing someone else's expertise, like asking your buddy to borrow his Lamborghini for a while. After a lot of trial and error, I figured out a way to allow other people to share in my ads and my marketing systems and the offers I promote that convert like clockwork for me, because by doing so,